The real bombshell is not simply that Meghan is returning to Britain. It is that Catherine reportedly discovered the plan through the newspapers, and if that detail is true, the return was never merely a family reunion. It was a decision made above her, around her, and potentially at the expense of the boundaries she spent years building around her children. Because when Harry and Meghan stepped back into Britain,
Harry had wanted to destroy this because he wants Meghan to be in there. And if he gets rid of the others, he'll be delighted because Meghan wants to be queen.
Prince William and Catherine, who under no circumstances, in my view, would allow these traitors, these lecherous, to get their way back into the royal family. I don't believe for a moment.
Em needs to hang on to H for her connection to royalty, so she keeps her imagined relevance.
Traitor Prince Harry emerged victorious overnight in Washington, D.C. His goofy grin not covering up an alarmingly bald hairline, those the words he used about his brother Prince William.
They do not enter an empty stage. They enter a royal family already reshaped by years of conflict, illness, resentment, and broken trust. And right at the center of that storm stands Catherine, with George, Charlotte, and Louis potentially caught in the middle. That is why Catherine's reported reaction matters so much. This is not simply about two adults who stopped speaking comfortably to one another. It is about a history that became public, accusations that traveled around the world, and wounds that were never publicly repaired. The moment Oprah became the platform for explosive claims about the royal household, the temperature changed permanently. Meghan spoke about concerns surrounding the color of a baby's skin before his birth, while the palace faced accusations of racism.
They'll be lying all the way through. They'll be lying all the way through about it. And every time, you see Harry sees his dad, and his dad said, please don't say anything, this is private. And then he goes off to the BBC and tells them all about it. So we don't have anyone we can trust, certainly not Meghan, who makes up things.
No name was officially confirmed, yet the implication dominated headlines and conversations for months. And then came the detail that made the entire dispute even more personal. Meghan claimed Catherine made her cry before the royal wedding. Catherine did not launch a television counterattack. She did not publicly expose private conversations. She remained silent. That silence became one of the defining features of the entire saga. But silence should never automatically be mistaken for surrender. Sometimes silence means someone is carefully recording everything, watching everything.
And this is a really important point for me. William and Catherine, who I don't think, I can't imagine there's going to be much happiness on that side. They've been and are this consistent, wonderful feature, I think, and I think they're the future of the British monarchy. Let's not forget that a lot of what Meghan stirred up online caused real difficulty for Catherine. She went through cancer. William is massively and rightly protective of his wife.
And waiting until the moment when words are no longer necessary. Catherine's refusal to publicly fight back created a striking contrast with the continuing stream of interviews and revelations surrounding Harry and Meghan. While one side kept explaining its version of events, Catherine largely allowed her actions to speak instead. And then her own personal crisis arrived. Surgery, a cancer diagnosis, months of recovery while still carrying the responsibilities surrounding 3 young children and the future of the monarchy. Yet according to the narrative presented by commentators close to this controversy, the public conversation surrounding Harry and Meghan did not simply disappear during that period. New stories continued appearing. New interpretations continued circulating. And for Catherine, the timing could hardly have been more painful. Imagine attempting to recover privately while knowing that every new interview, every accusation, and every carefully positioned story can reopen conflicts you never chose to make public in the first place. Then came the question that now hangs over the entire royal household: what happens when Harry and Meghan return permanently? Because Catherine is not only protecting herself, she is protecting George, Charlotte, and Louis from becoming characters inside an adult conflict they never created. Their schools, their routines, their friendships, and ordinary childhood moments suddenly become potentially connected to a royal drama that has already consumed years of headlines. And this is where King Charles becomes central to the controversy. While Catherine and William reportedly faced the consequences of the family conflict from inside the institution, Charles has repeatedly been portrayed as deeply concerned about bringing Harry back into the fold. His position is understandable from a father's perspective, but from the perspective of the future monarchy, it creates a much more explosive question. Can a father welcome his son home without simultaneously reopening the very conflict that damage the relationship between Harry and William? That question becomes even more uncomfortable when Catherine's position is considered. She cannot simply decide that the past never happened. She cannot erase the interviews, the accusations, the memoir, or the years of public scrutiny. And she certainly cannot control what Harry and Meghan choose to do once they are physically back in Britain. Yet the most dramatic claim in this entire story is that Charles may have been quietly preparing the ground for their return, while William and Catherine were left outside the decision-making process. Palace insiders have allegedly referred to this strategy as Operation Thor, portraying it as a long-term effort to create a pathway back for Harry and Meghan. If that account is accurate, then the real confrontation is not simply between relatives. It is between two competing visions of the monarchy, one centered on reconciliation at almost any cost, and another centered on protecting the institution and the people who have carried it forward. And that is where Catherine's position becomes impossible to ignore. Because if Harry and Meghan return, the question is no longer whether Catherine can avoid them. The question becomes how close they can get to her family, her children, and the future she has spent years protecting. And if Charles is willing to open that door despite everything that happened before, then Catherine may soon be forced to draw a line far more publicly than she ever wanted. But the most explosive part of this story is still ahead, because the return itself may only be the beginning, and what happens next could reveal exactly why Catherine's position inside the royal family is changing so dramatically. The pressure on Catherine becomes even more complicated when the question of Harry's role in Britain enters the picture. If Harry lives permanently in the United Kingdom and accepts even a limited connection to royal duties or charitable work, the security question immediately becomes relevant. Suddenly, the return is no longer simply about a son coming home to see his father. It becomes a question about status, protection, public appearances, and how much space Harry and Meghan could occupy inside an institution they previously walked away from. William and Catherine would have to watch as the same family member whose memoir exposed private conversations could potentially begin appearing at British events again, with cameras inevitably comparing everything he does with everything they do. And that comparison could become relentless. Every charity appearance by Harry could be measured against William and Catherine. Every public engagement could generate headlines. Every photograph could become a story about reconciliation, rivalry, or who was more popular. The Sussex return could therefore create exactly the kind of media competition that Catherine has spent years trying to avoid. She has continued working through enormous personal pressure without publicly attacking the decisions being made around her, while Harry and Meghan's return would immediately place their lives back under the brightest possible spotlight. The children make this even more sensitive. Archie and Lilibet reportedly entering British schools means their worlds could begin overlapping geographically with George, Charlotte, and Louis. Suddenly, ordinary school functions and family occasions could become potential points of contact. That is where Catherine's reported boundary becomes critical. She has no obligation to transform a deeply damaged relationship into a public reconciliation simply because Harry has returned. She can protect her children without publicly declaring war. She can maintain distance without explaining every reason. And perhaps most importantly, she can refuse to allow George, Charlotte, and Louis to become symbols in an adult dispute. For years, Catherine has reportedly understood that the safest strategy was restraint. But restraint has limits. Eventually, silence can become a decision rather than merely a response. Meanwhile, the explanation surrounding the speed of the return raises another set of questions. The public was told that the children's education and a desire to establish roots in Britain were major factors. Yet commentators began pointing toward Harry's immigration situation in America, particularly after disclosures in Spare concerning past drug use. The Heritage Foundation had already raised questions about whether Harry accurately disclosed his history when seeking entry to the United States. Those allegations do not establish that Harry committed an immigration offense, but they created a legal controversy that became impossible to ignore. The suggestion that federal authorities were preparing to remove him or pursue criminal charges remains an allegation, not an established fact, yet it became part of the larger narrative surrounding the sudden move. Then came the financial pressure. The legal judgment involving Harry and the Daily Mail added another enormous burden, while the Montecito property remained expensive to maintain. Netflix had reportedly changed the nature of its relationship with Harry and Meghan. Spotify was already finished, and the A's Ever brand had struggled to create the commercial impact once expected. Suddenly, the dream of building an entirely independent American empire looked considerably less secure. And this is where the story circles back to Charles. If Harry's American position becomes financially or legally uncomfortable, Britain becomes more than a sentimental destination. It becomes a strategic base. Charles can offer access, legitimacy, and potentially a pathway back into British public life. But every concession to Harry creates another question for William and Catherine. Where exactly is the boundary between welcoming a son home and rebuilding the role that son once abandoned? Catherine has remained publicly silent, but silence does not mean she has accepted everything. The more Harry and Meghan move closer to Britain, the more unavoidable the confrontation becomes, because this is no longer just about two brothers, two wives, or one fractured family. It is about who controls access to the future of the monarchy, who protects the next generation, and whether Charles's desire for reconciliation could ultimately force Catherine to choose between keeping the peace and drawing a line that cannot be crossed.